Latinx, Latina, Latino. Is it offensive? None of the above makes sense? Or is it just semantics? Hi everyone, my name is Brenda Moreno. I use she, ella pronouns. I'm the founder of In.Visible Paradigms. And this is this is exactly where we're going to have our conversation exist in today, is what parts of us feel uncomfortable naming in terms of our relationship, and what parts of us feel really excited. Join us today in the last of our 3-part series with Linet from Unconscious Bias Project and myself from In.Visible Paradigms. I hope you're all doing well, and we wanted to also allow this time to just settle in and reflect on parts of your identity that have felt unseen, maybe silenced, maybe parts of your identity that are still being processed, pending articulation, exploring those silences. This is our conversation with Linet from Unconscious Bias Project and myself. We're waiting for her to join. So we offer this time just a reflection to see what parts of yourself are joining our space today. What parts of yourself do you often feel like you have to negotiate and leave behind? We're happy that you're here. I think, there we go.
Hi. I see I'm a little cut off, actually, and my internet's not super great. It's okay. We can work through
We're gonna
that.
roll.
We're gonna
Yeah.
work through it. Yeah.
How
Hi,
are you?
Brenda. How are you?
Hi. I'm okay. It's kind of bittersweet. This is the last, and it feels, I think with these conversations, you can never really put a bow on it. You can never really tie it off and be like, here's the close. And today we're talking about Latina, Latinx, Latino, or none of the above, and it feels like such an opening, like a continuation. So I'm feeling both excited and a little sad, but also it is what it is, like this is part of it. How are you? How are you doing?
Absolutely. Um, I think I wish I could really show you the outside right now, but it's a little
Love it.
cloudy. It's warm. It's a little bit humid. I know that's strange for New Mexico, but it's a little humid.
Desert.
There's some sunshine. I can see some birds outside, and it just sort of feels like that inside. So there's a lot
Mm,
of things that we're juggling at the Unconscious Bias Project. There's some things that I'm working on in my personal life.
mm,
And yeah, so a little bit of that bittersweet. I'm thinking about this conversation, what a joy it's been to get to know you some more, and what excellent, questions we've posed for each other, we've thought of, and how I think like we're really pushing each other in a way to be like, okay, so what does this actually mean? Like when we're talking about it with each other, when we're talking about it to our clients, when
Yeah.
we're I don't think that we often get that space in some ways to really think about ourselves. Some folks have to confront it because of their
Yeah.
reality, but we don't often just have I'm going to choose to just sit here and explore in this moment. So I really appreciate that piece that we're doing together. That's my sunshine that's like coming through.
That's the sun. It's beautiful. I'm so touched by it. Um, well, yeah, let's get to it. But I was gonna say, like, let's
Yeah.
continue to step in this unfolding. Do you want to do the next part?
Oh, yeah. I realized I didn't introduce myself. So, hi, everybody. My name is Linet Mera, Lynette Mera. I am the
Mm.
co-executive director of the Unconscious Bias Project, and I'm really grateful to be here. My pronouns are she, hers. I think we covered that in one of the earlier ones. And I'm currently calling in from Las Cruces, New Mexico, that is
Mhm.
on unceded land of the currently three tribe Piro, Manso, and Tiwa tribes of New Mexico. And I mentioned that piece. I do my best to always remember this piece of land, but I specifically thought a lot about it in terms of what we're going to talk about today, because
Whoa.
um, identity and even concepts of race and Latinidad and Latinx and all these pieces are very interconnected with our history. And for both you and I, that
Mhm.
history has to do with indigeneity. And we'll get, that's just a teaser, so we'll definitely talk a little bit more about that. And before we got into it, I did want to plug that we are open and able to receive your support. Brenda and I are sort of doing this work here, and not sort of, we are doing this work here
Yeah.
because we love it. We love it. We want to do this work. We want people to push themselves. We're pushing ourselves. We really want to make the space for all of us to explore our own identities, to think about ourselves with a little more intentionality than maybe we would normally.
Yeah.
And you can support us in doing this work. So we have a URL where you can go to donate. So Conscious Bias Project is a nonprofit. So if you donate through this link that Brenda's just put into the chat, thanks Brenda, you are able to support us with any amount that you feel able to. If you don't have the resources to give right now, seriously, no judgment. We know it's still the pandemic. Please
Yeah.
do share it with some folks. In this particular collaboration with In.Visible Paradigms is part of a broader set of outreach events in the community that the Unconscious Bias Project is doing with several of our community partners. So any amount you can do to support us, or any folks that you can share to, or any networks that you can share to, is really going towards supporting these kinds of, free, open to the public resources and discussions for everybody. So please head over there. And if you want to learn more about sponsoring our series specifically, or the entire outreach campaign, you can go to ubproject.org/resources, Breaking Bread Bias, or you can search Breaking Bread and Bias and you can find that information. Okay, with that piece said, I am so excited. So with that being said, I think we should all just sort of like settle into our seats and our spaces. I'm going to guide us through about a 1 minute breathing sort of connection to our body. And it's really just a reminder to sort of reset and resource, because we're talking about identity. It can get uncomfortable. I don't expect but you might get triggered. Maybe a memory that you had might come up suddenly and it's like, oh my gosh. So, have water. If you need to take space, walk away, come back. Great. A little stretchy, something to do with your hands. That's totally fine. And know that we hope to eventually have this recording on our websites. And my awesome co-ed Alexis has been doing some hard work on getting transcripts for all of the videos that we're going to have. So you can also read it later. You can come back to it or meditate on it. So we're here for you. Okay, so let's take a minute to sort of arrive. If you want to close your eyes, close your eyes. If you want them half open, if you want to leave them open, it's totally up to you. Maybe take this opportunity to not stare at the screen and just take a few inhales, exhale, sensing the temperature of the air as it enters, as it leaves. Notice the changes in your body when you're breathing. Any changes in your chest, in your back, and your shoulders. Allow room for that expansiveness, that constance, that is the air around us, that is the ground beneath us. In the next few breaths, think of preparing yourself as a recipient for curiosity, for exploration. In the next couple of breaths, think of something or someone that you deeply love. Hold on to that feeling that comes in your body, the thoughts that come to your mind when you think about that love. And in the last couple of breaths, reflect that back into yourself. Then coming back to the room, listen to the sounds outside your room. Feel your body in your chair. Give your shoulders some rolls. Maybe your neck move a little bit. And join us when you're ready. I took us there. I just feel like we need a little bit more for today. So thank you for joining me with that. I did want to do a quick recap of what we talked about last time. So last time we started talking about what does it mean to be seen? How does that feel to be seen? Sort of understanding and being aware that we bring different parts of ourselves in different spaces. There are some parts that we purposely put out there. There's some parts that we can't control, that are out there for other people to take in, and that there are parts of ourselves that we only share with some people, maybe just our family, maybe just our closest friends, and that there are parts of ourselves that we don't share with anybody. There could be those parts that we choose to stay hidden, and also a recognition that a lot of identity can come with risks and with pain, like erasure, being silenced. So you can't always put what you want out there and have it be received as such. And so there was a lot of pieces in there, and I really encourage you, if you're joining us for today, to go and check those other videos that we recorded in our conversations together. And then I think I'm throwing the mic back to you, Brenda. Right?
Yeah.
Looking at our notes on the side.
Thank you for grounding us physically, but also emotionally to the thread and multiple threads that we've woven throughout these conversations. And today is especially important. So all the days are important, but this conversation, I think, hits home, and we've started to bring these themes of how Linet and I identify with our communities in our respective countries of Latin America. I'm from Mexico, and you're from Colombia, and the identifier of a community, of a huge cultural community, so much in the U.S. Is the Latina. And then the Latino-Latina community. And then recently there's the Latine, Latinx, Latina. And we wanted to explore that for ourselves and offer insights, maybe frameworks, maybe call to action, and but really explore the tension of, is it offensive and is it just semantics? And it's important because hopefully you'll see that in this conversation, in where we're going to be existing in, it actually touches exactly to what you were saying, which is colonialism, indigeneity, and even anti-Blackness. And so we can go through all these different deeper threads that are important for anyone to know, because it's not just simple terminology for our community. It really shapes experiences of self and forms how we connect with others across time and across place. So it's a really important part for anchoring our conversation into the why. And a question we have for you all, for those joining us live or joining us in the recording, but take a moment, hit pause. But our question for you is, have you ever felt uncomfortable discussing part of your identity with someone because its name and its history? You know, and I'll actually ask that to you, Linet, too, maybe to kick us off, and then we'll explore the forest here.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think there's a certain history in Colombia. When you say I am Colombian, soy colombiana, what does that mean? And I purposely chose what I'm wearing, right? I brought out my shirt. So those that you don't know me personally,
Oh,
I brought props, right? I also brought one of my favorite hand knitted bags. This is made in Colombia. I have this great, they're things, right? But I think it brings to a greater point. I have this mafalda, right? There's some things that we share as Latinos. I always have my Colombia bracelet with me. And I bring these things up to start, I think, sort of like the first some of the pieces in the history of what it means to be Colombian and travel outside of Colombia, right? Because soy colombiana in Colombia is going to mean very different things than saying I am Colombian in the US, in different parts of the US. It's going to be different if you say I'm Colombian in Venezuela. It's going to be different if you say I'm Colombian in Europe, different parts of Europe. It's going to be very different. And one of the many parts of what Colombia means to different folks and means to me has to do with history. And there's so much history. We could spend like maybe a full lifetime discussing the history there. But even just the name, Colombia, right? Colón, Cristobal Colón, like it's coming from like the people that decided what Colombia is called are not necessarily the people that lived there when Cristobal Colón arrived, like are not necessarily the people that developed the land to where it is now, are not necessarily representative of all the people. One of my earliest experiences talking about myself as Colombian in the US was, I remember as a 15-year-old being asked if my dad was a drug dealer and if the reason I was here was because he dealt cocaine and whether or not I could hook him up. This was literally something that another teenager said to me. And several years ago, yeah, I'm not 15 anymore. If you can see me, I'm not 15. And if you can't see me, I'm a white passing 36-year-old woman. That's who I am. And in the sort of late 90s, there is still a lot of association with in sort of surrounding countries near Colombia of Colombians with vandalism, with burglary, with theft. It was sort of like very, being Colombian meant you were going to be violent, you were uneducated, you were sort of the lesser of the countries in Latin America. Like that was the association
That's a
because,
whole other thing. Yeah.
right? That was association because we had gone through a very intense history, and we're still going through a very intense time with violence. Is kicked off with La Violencia, and there's lots of books about it, some that are better than others, but La Violencia, so a lot of uprising actually of the working class and especially farm laborers that were being mistreated by the rich. This sort of very big civil upheaval that ended up molding through into a lot of the conflict that is still, less prominent, but still around today, of the guerrilla, the guerrilla warfare, and then it ties into the drug trade and the war against drugs. And there's a lot of issues there with how Colombia politically has worked or hasn't worked with the U.S. in the past and present. And for those of you that are paying attention to news right now, what being Colombian today is like, we're in a huge civil upheaval again. Protests going against, we call it La Reforma Tributaria, which is really a tax proposal by the president that is really just going to further impact low and middle class people that were already suffering from COVID, economic effects and health effects. And so it's a lot of, there's still a lot there. There's a lot of stuff that comes with being Colombian. And so I brought that there to say that when I was in the US and I was applying for college, because I finished high school in the US, as I was applying for college, you write, okay, I'm Hispanic. I was like, what does, okay, yeah, sure, I speak Spanish, but I'm not sure what this means. Like, that's not a race. And I don't identify myself as a race. In Colombia, you're not necessarily talking about race all the time. Not to say it's not important or that there isn't racism, but you're not necessarily thinking of like, yes, I'm a Spanish speaker. This is who I am. This is my identity. That's it's different. And then for me, the first time I saw the expression of Latinos, Latina, and even the current iterations of Latinx, I felt like that is so much better than defining me by a language that was brought over by colonialists that like destroyed, so much of indigenous culture and people and history and language. And so I have a lot of mixed emotions, and I do feel uncomfortable discussing being Colombian, not because I'm ashamed of being Colombian, and not because I'm ashamed of saying, that we can share some love or some shared understanding from coming from countries in Latin America, but because of the way it's perceived by others and the idea of like, okay, then I can put you in this box of you're not like me. That's the part that gets uncomfortable.
Yeah.
How about you?
Similar, and I think sometimes like very parallel to what you were saying of first experiences in the US. I think that is such an important point of origin for me in understanding where I am now in this work of anti-oppression and decolonization, even of myself. And that's where I need to start. And that parallel is not knowing how to identify in a new country is something that anyone, even if you travel, if you're trying to understand what are the social identity markers in that country, always has to do with the history and power dynamic and how that country's built to center some and not others. I think it's not natural, but that is pervasive in the world. And in the US, the part that I struggle most with my identity now, and the part that feels uncomfortable, is actually part of my relationship with saying I'm Mexican, or more broadly speaking, the part of me that used to identify as Latina, Latino. I don't ascribe myself to that identity anymore, mainly because of it's for me it has felt a construct that has existed in the US and serves communities that feel attached to that, and members who feel like really excited about that and feel resonance. For me, it's hard to ascribe to that identity, knowing that it reinforces oppression of others in other ways. So Latina, Latino, Latinx, I think, opens a really fruitful conversation about gender in Latin America, about the delayed progress in talking, like in mainstream, the delayed progress in talking about trans and queer identities in English, in the Spanish language, and I think that's somewhere where I am really excited to talk about. To my point is, for me, this identity, Latina, Latino, is close with colonial structures that push anti-Blackness. And in Mexico, there is so much of that still taking place. And so there's a part in which we talk about Latina, Latino, and it mostly centers white passing individuals. It centers certain people of a certain class. It centers certain experiences of immigration than others. So it's mostly people who, like you and I, have grew up in a country but moved here. It's people that are light skinned. It's people that pass or that are like, it has a flavor of whiteness that doesn't feel very comfortable for me in the sense of wanting to, maybe that flavor of whiteness is assimilation, or the idea of Latinidad, which is not having even there a broad conversation about indigeneity and anti-Blackness, something of the slave trade, cross-Atlantic slave trade that touched all of these countries, all of the world. And so part of me feels conflicted to identify as Latina, Latino. In this moment, I'm not someone that would correct and like push away, but it's an opportunity for me to just step in and be like, did you know? Or how about this? Or ask me how I prefer to identify. Because so there's that dimension. The part that I feel uncomfortable, but I have more willingness to explore, is my identity with Mexico. And you brought up some really beautiful parts about your, parts of the country that represent that for you. And it's so interesting. I wore this as well without really knowing. And behind me, there's an ofrenda, there's a mujer con una trenza. So there's parts of me, even in how I chose to show up today, and which is indicative of parts of ourselves that we choose to not showcase, or parts of ourselves that maybe are more celebrated in certain areas than others. And I think for us, in a professional sense, this isn't always celebrated. This isn't seen as professional. But with Mexico, there are spaces, especially in some in genome, in DNA genetics, research in grassroots and activist spaces that are trying to bring this indigeneity into Mexico. And that feels like such an exploration for me, and something that I've started to take here and there. I found this organization called Somos, which takes your raw data from 23andMe. If you've given that data to any of these places, they take the raw data and like match it with indigenous identities in Mexico. And it's always expanding. So there's parts of me that I think with this discomfort, there are openings for me to explore, and there's discomfort in and places where I'm starting to create a separation. Mm-hmm. But having this conversation is something that is not shared in my family that much, or it's not even talked about in Mexico, nonetheless, which reinforces for me this idea of my family in Mexico. And to your point, like reinforces for me this idea of this is a very U.S. based conversation, and to me, it there's something there I'm still working with as to what's being in that conversation, what's filtered out, what doesn't get. Just by virtue of where we live in this colonized continent.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I'll stop there.
No, I love all the parts that you brought up. Oh my gosh, there's so much there. So I think that's really interesting, because, you know, when one of the things that that I think you spoke to that I barely touched on that I thought was really great was the anti-Blackness piece. And I have seen both the identity with a nationality used very much in the identity with Latinidad as tools for anti-Blackness. So for those folks joining us, we're getting into Latinidad, Latino, Latinx, Latinat, and newsflash, Latino, Latina, Latinx, whatever you choose to use, Latine, it is not a race. So in the anti-Blackness space, there is a lot of, I have seen in Colombia, within Colombia, rejection of proof of racism. So very easy example, during Carnaval, which is a sort of the Mardi Gras or Fat Tuesday version, celebration, there's parades, there's sort of a representation of figures that mean different things in different locations, and there is part of the characters of Carnaval that is blackface. Like part of the of the Carnaval is people putting on blackface and representing this black person that is freed, and so it's a joyful character. Much of if any of you are familiar with oh my gosh, it's escaping me, but the blackface that was used in the theaters, it's escaping me right now. In theaters, in American music and American minstrel shows. There we go, minstrel shows. Yeah. That sort of portray this like joyous, slightly dim-witted black person with poor language skills, not very smart, very subservient. There's a lot of parallels there with this character that comes up in Carnaval. And people reject it. They're like, we are not Americans, we are not racist, because people that are dark-skinned and Colombians are just our negritos. They're just our black people. They're Colombians just like you and me. And there's a rejection of that there even is racism. Even people that are very clearly racist, and I know those people in my family, and will say, derogatory things about about Black people, insulting their ability to work, their intellect, their, are they trustworthy even? That is somehow not racist. And we are not racist because they're all Colombian, but it's not true. As you
Yeah.
mentioned, slavery was a very big part of how Colombia came to be. It was a very big part of even like the erasure, the mass genocide of so many indigenous people in what is now known as Colombia, and was part of the reason why so many slaves were brought to this area in order to cultivate the crops, do the manual labor that was necessary to like create the colonialist economy. And that still impacts us today. So where are Black people in Colombia today? They're still not in positions of power. They are still facing very high barriers of entry into jobs. They get paid less. And this is not something, oh, that was 10 years ago. This is now. Like I have my cousin-in-law, I suppose. She's more darker skin. I think maybe you could call her Afro-Caribeña because she's from the coastal region. But she went into the capital, Bogota. That was where I was born. And for those joining, my dad is from Barranquilla, which is a coastal area, which is has a lot more descendants from slaves and less obvious. It's still very Black, and there's still areas like Palenque, for example, that still retain some of their like Yoruba language, some of their Yoruba roots, and pieces that they can still connect, and dances and things like that. Not everywhere, right? Okay. And so it's a little more connected there. But if you go into Bogota, it's very white, and you can even tell in the way people speak. So the way I speak Spanish is the way people in Bogota speak. It's very enunciated. It's a little faster spoken, and especially my grandmother would claim it's proper Castellano. So, whoa, there's more there to unpack. Yes. Language for sure.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And so this so my cousin, coming back to my cousin-in-law, she came to Bogota. She's an educator, and she went to look for job in Bogota. And no joke, the school, I mean, the job security in Colombia is a whole nother thing. But the school called her up during her trial period and was like, a couple of parents have contacted us because they're concerned about your skin color and having somebody like you teaching their kids. And this is a legit reason for her being let go. So there are no laws protecting against racism. None. It's just a thing that happens, and you just kind of like, okay, and you move on. And the thing is, that's the problem. And so I was thinking about that with Latinidad, because one of the reasons I see in connecting to, oh, somos Latinos, yeah, we share this, I'm a Latinx person, is one, I get to talk about our non-binary, our queer Latinx folks, right? Because then they're, well, why do you use X? Why not A? Like, you're Latina, you're obviously a woman, right? Well, I want to be inclusive, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not gonna like Colombianex. That's not something that we're using yet, but Latinx is something that is being used, and people do recognize, and it is an opening. But at least in Colombia, we see a lot like, I'm thinking of music. Like in music, there's like, que si somos Latinos, like there's a lot of talk about unifying, and there's in even like the political spheres, thinking about, you know, the I forget what the term is in English, but the hold that the U.S. economy and politics has on a lot of countries in Latin America is still very reminiscent of colonialism, right? The U.S. is the one that sets the tone for economic trade agreements. They're the ones that set, you know, are who's going to get elected, right? They're the ones like, okay, go and look up Panama and the history of Panama. Like, why is Colombia, who's right next to Panama, why are they not all the same thing? Go read it. It'll be very informative. You know, so there's still sort of that, you know, if we are Latinos juntos together, you know, we can be ourselves as opposed to be under the thumb of U.S. capitalism, U.S. colonialism, and all these U.S. things. So that's one part. And I think definitely in the U.S., it's talked about a lot because of multiple things. And one of those, I think, is the idea to unite in political action. Does it also divide? I think it,
Yeah. Yes, because I think, thank you for laying that history out. In Colombia, you gave us a history of economics, capitalism, anti-Blackness minstrel, in Latin America is prominent. I had a reaction when you were talking about the Carnaval character, because in Mexico we have Minin Pingüin, who I don't know if it's actually Mexican, but it's another very derogatory. I'm gonna have to look that up while we're talking. It's a very derogatory cartoon that you can buy like cutouts for and for parties. Like, it is another one of those characters, and I remember having difficult conversations with my mother. I mean, like, this is absurd. This is very racist, and explaining it. She was like, no, it's not. It's endearing. It's funny. It's innocent. Because this character, similar to you, where the threads I want to lift up is anti-Blackness. The way that minstrel shows happen in the U.S. and in Latin America is no coincidence. There's very few coincidences in colonialism, and when there is oppression that takes place, it's no accident. And so there's a part here. There's also a part about linguicism that you talked about, and those that don't know, I don't have the definition exactly in front of me. I'll do my best to define it, but linguicism is the oppression, because it can be, you can lose your job if you don't speak properly. It is the way in which like you are audibly perceived. So if you have an accent, especially if you have a second English language learner, it's also, linguicism can be experienced, correct me if I'm wrong, but across different regions of the U.S. with Southern, you know, we have stereotype, versus the New Yorker versus the person in New Jersey versus, you know, and these it's an ism because for immigrants and in Latin America, if you don't speak a certain way, you're not going to be taken seriously. And in minstrel characters, blackface characters in Mexico, in Latin America, linguicism was huge, because then not only is this character black and or like derogatory, super exaggerated features, but their Spanish is also broken. Their Spanish is not clean. It doesn't make sense. Sounds kind of, you know, unintelligible and unintelligent. And that's also not a coincidence in how how we push an anti-Blackness ideology within Latin America. And these two are important, I think, also for experiences in the U.S., where, again, this is why I think of it as a flavor of whiteness, because there's a certain type of Latina or Latina that comes to mind that is celebrated, that is in pop culture, that is also commodified. So it's a double-edged sword in some of these instances about identities that are desired, similar to anti-Asian oppression, anti-Asian sentiments. The double edge of exotification and marginalization are bedfellows to communities. Anyway, that's like a huge tangent, but I wanted to bring linguicism as another component that in Latin America, and this is important for allies listening who always question, why is it important for me to learn if it's Latina, Latin? These are the histories that are in the room when we articulate, or these are histories that you should just know. In Latin America, Mexico was colonized, Colombia was colonized. There are many countries in Latin America that share Spain as a colonizing force. And Spain, in terms of the Spanish language, is used as the North Star for being right, proper, and educated. So within that comes sentiments about class, within that comes sentiments about colorism, within that comes sentiments about Christianity, all three anchors of violence against Indigenous community. And so it is important for anyone to know and respect why some people choose one sort of identifier, especially in the Latinx, Latina community, and other people might choose BIPOC, or Indigenous, because it kind of removes everything that centers the oppression and marginalization that takes place, and centers the true origins of many of these countries pre-colonial times. And I guess I jumped ahead, but that is my call to action for people listening in, is these things matter, these different iterations of identity in this, from Mexico all the way down to Chile and the islands in between. This matters for you to know, for you to understand like the textures of violence in some of the identities that we carry. And I think it's really hard for people in the US. There's a decision, like, to have this conversation with my parents, I think should happen more often, but there is a decision for many immigrant parents to choose to assimilate as a way to survive, as a way to assimilate, as a way to pass and have the best outcomes for their children. And so greater context needs to be, I'm just charging my phone. Greater context needs to be added here if you encounter elders in the community that really abide by Latina, Latinx, to respect that, because there's something there that, that might be painful, or it's just a choice, and that's also great. I wanted to ask if you could define, or what is Hispanic?
Right. So the best, I think the easiest way to put it is that Hispanic is a term really that, from my understanding, really comes from the US's decision to make it something on the census. Like this, the way it was sort of adopted in was this way. And it is defined as Spanish speaking. So it comes from the Latin root of like what Spanish is, Hispania, Española, like that's where it's coming from. And I think actually when you brought up linguistic discrimination, linguicism, that's really good. And I see our friends from the 559 Mural Project are in here. Hola! And they're, one of their co-leaders, Sirina Resendes, she put out an article recently, and I wish I'd pulled it up now so I could do it justice. There is this tying of that you're a Spanish speaker, right, to this that you're a Spanish speaker has to be a part of your identity is utter bullshit, right? Like how could you possibly, do that when you like purposefully erase and destroy language, right? That's part of like the colonialist mentality, the efforts in anywhere. This could be in Canada, this could be in the US, this is in Colombia and Mexico, is like destroying of the indigenous languages and cultures. The US participated in the exact same thing. And the specific article that I'm thinking of that I can't remember in full, but there was actually policy introduced in California, I believe in, maybe it was the 70s, to ban teaching of Spanish in public schools. So you weren't allowed to speak Spanish, you weren't allowed to study it. And so bring onto that the history of discrimination, of like, dehumanizing people that came into the US without documentation. Late 90s. Oh my gosh. So it was even more recent. So in the late 90s, this policy sort of further reinforces not wanting to teach your kids Spanish, further reinforces not wanting to talk about it, further reinforces that as being something that to be proud of. And so that meant that a lot of in our generation grew up without speaking Spanish, even if their parents were, immigrants or first generation themselves, or who knows how many generations. It was purposely moved out of education, purposely, it's not just like, oh, are you getting, discriminated against for a job? It's like, it's in the education, it's in our system, it's there can be laws, but the reason why the laws are there is because it's so bad. Like, laws don't fix things. Laws are like, this is what we need to aim for, and laws aren't perfect. And we're both on the same page that are like, justice system is messed up, right? So like our legal system is messed up, so I love that you put this piece of like, I think it's coming all the way back to the beginning of like, believe people when they tell you who they are, like believe people and don't assume. And it is subtlety. It is, like I consider myself an ally for darker skinned Latinx folks or Colombianx folks, or, because I know that I have a privilege in that I don't speak with much of an accent, right? I know that I have a privilege with my skin color. And, we shouldn't assume, right, that the ideal, right, the stereotype of what is a Latina. We shouldn't assume what, if you say you're Mexican American, do you automatically have to eat tamales and know about hot sauce and, I don't know, margaritas and speak Spanish? Like, no, it's just like these are social constructs, and identity is about relationship and history. And I want to, I took us out there, but I'm bringing us back to opportunity. This is an opportunity. We're inviting you to explore if you've never felt uncomfortable about some part of your identity, take this opportunity, take this chance to explore others, take this chance to question why, in the US, so many people are monolinguists. They don't learn other languages outside of English, when other colonialist countries, like the Netherlands, for example, they're often multilingual. So there's just ask. And I think I want to throw it back to you for like our last question that we have to the audience and to close, because like you said at the beginning, this is a whole huge, this is like a huge, like gigantic mountain to unpack. And what we're doing is just sort of lightly touching on all these different juicy bits. And there's opportunity, there's believing, there's trust, there's listening, there's exploring, and there's respecting, and all those pieces are part of what we can do, what we would encourage you all to do moving forward.
Yes, I want to say one thing about Hispanics. Similar to Latino, it is a course. It is a it is a lifelong understanding, just like white allies need to continuously understand what the evolution. Language is trying to catch up to experiences that have taken place, histories that are being formed, and so language evolves the best way, and it's always shaped by people. Language and history are always having a conversation with each other, so don't get discouraged when things change. BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, may, we might shed that term and have something that's more reflective of people's experiences. And I think that's something that's really beautiful. And our role and responsibility as allies to anyone is to understand and hear the voices from communities most affected in that. Hispanic is one of them that I have found with folks, especially, so Español, you named it, like Española, Nueva España, New Española was for the Dominican island that shares Haiti and the Dominican Republic. That is the designated term for Española. And a New Española is in itself Spain saying like New England here in the US. And so there are people that are shoving that down the toilet intentionally as Hispanic, the term, because it is still the colonizers' way of erasing differences within indigeneity and then marking, like excavating land to create and reinforce those differences through capitalism and slavery and religion and political empires. Anyway, so I just wanted to share that a little bit more as to why some folks really push away from certain terms. It's because, again, we're done with that. Some people are really over that and no longer align with that term because it's harmful, because it's oppressive, because it erases what people are experiencing now, which is simultaneous healing and liberation work and activism and advocacy work. So language is really important. It's not just semantics, which answers the trick question at the beginning of the slide. Okay, and then I'll pass it to you to pass it to me.
Well, actually, I was hoping you would talk a little bit about one of the questions that we brought up together is sort of and you're posing now is there's a lot of language, terms can change. So what if you are a white person and you're trying to be an ally, but there's so many terms all the time, right? Like even people with disabilities, there are two camps on how they want to be called. Some people are like, I am a person with a disability. Someone's like, no, I am a disabled person. This is part of me. Yeah. And it's like
alcohol addict and person in recovery. Yeah.
Oh, great example. There are so many pieces of identity. There's so many ways to talk about different people. There's so many different ways that even people that identified with a certain term might have shed in the past. Like you're talking about, like maybe, I don't know, maybe 20, 30 years ago, being like, yes, I'm Hispanic feels right, but now it doesn't, right? And so as say a white person or maybe someone that's straight like me, coming to like, well, is it queer? Do I cite all of the alphabet for LGBTQIA plus and then some? Is it NB? Is it non-binary? Like how do I even know? Where do I? And obviously, I'm putting up a question here. How do you know what the right term is to choose? How do you even passively keep up with all of this?
Well, there's no passiveness to learning. Change doesn't happen in isolation, so you have to take an active role that this work is personal transformation, which means if you want to be an ally to the community, which check whether you're being paternalistic or savior-y in that even instance, but if you are being an accomplice to social justice movement, meaning a world in which oppression is dismantled, you have to be willing to change in that process. This isn't something that your allyship is outsourced and then never touches you. So when BIPOC or like people of color, it used to be colored people, and then that got turned on its head by community saying, actually, we're going to reclaim this because we're having a moment of liberation and of healing. People of color came into be, then Black, then African American, then Black again. So there's all these things that tell this story for you as an ally to understand the traces of history, the victories within it, that the liberation work that you can support. It is vital to understand and trace this history. Otherwise, you're going in, as you're saying, like very passively and never only doing more harm than good. Mm-hmm. And that's on a racial, that's on an every term. On a term of, on the basis of queer, that sexuality and gender, welcome to a new opportunity to look at your world. Like, gender and sexuality shape how we know ourselves, form knowledge, and connect and move around the world. So there is sacredness in being able to be a part of those communities and being a supporter of that community. We are all affected by white supremacy. Some of us have a really intimate role with it, and some of us are really harmed by it. If you have an intimate part of it, you have way more to lose, so there's a big risk, but you have a responsibility to keep up with language, and that's surface level. You have a responsibility to learn history. You have a responsibility to know what's taking place. And not everyone is ready for that because they want their allyship to be 1, 2, 3 bullet points and checklists, which only reinforce compliance and not solidarity. And if you're doing that, if you're getting frustrated, have 1 millisecond of frustration, but take that as an opportunity to reflect. And that's self-accountability. Honestly, that's an opportunity to be self-accountable and be like, actually, I don't know if I should be frustrated. That's something that we practice in our cohorts. We had one member be like, why? I feel like they keep adding letters to the LGBTQIA+ community. It's just an alphabet soup. Someone else at the dog park said that. Uh-huh. I'm off the clock right now. But it is inherent. If you're signing up and if you want to call yourself an ally, there are non-negotiables. And one of them is understanding how subtle and direct oppression takes place and getting the right language to get to the creative solutions with others. That's a lot of points. Hope that answers that.
Yeah. I think that's great, and I picked those examples on purpose because I've seen them pop up in different groups, both written and verbal. And my recommendation is like be in relationship about it, much like Brenda's saying. Like listen. It's an opportunity. A lot of folks have written about this. A lot of blogs. There's podcasts. There's lots of folks that are putting out their energy to help other people relate, to help bring in that allyship, the power, because this isn't something that, BIPOC people are deciding they're going to be BIPOC now. And so they're just going to take care of themselves because they are organizing these marches. Yeah.
It's not like we get together and we have a meeting of meeting notes and we're like, and adjourn. BIPOC is the...
Yeah.
There's no
Brenda,
secret
didn't
convention.
you come to BIPOC Tuesday last week?
Missed it.
You missed the memo? And you know there's Queer Wednesday, right? So
Right,
like,
I was at that one. I got my schedules confused.
yeah, see, I didn't get invited. No, okay, jokes aside, it's like it's not, yeah, it's an active thing, and it is work, and it's out there, and if you have like, you're like, oh, I have that one friend doesn't have to answer all your questions. Like, you can do some work, and you can listen, and you can ask. You can say, hey, I have something that it is a really silly question, probably. I've tried to research about it. Whatever. And I just wanted to know, like, for example, you talk about yourself as being queer when we're hanging out. Is that something that I could talk about when I'm introducing you to somebody else? Like, you can ask that. That is a perfectly fine thing to ask. Like, and just be, and don't ask it in public, just ask, but ask respectfully. And if they say no, like, I'm not out, professionally or whatever, then you respect that, and you ask. It's always a good move to ask, and there are different ways of asking. That's like a whole nother thing.
That's
But
next
learn,
year.
listen, learn,
Next
listen,
slide.
and ask. Yeah, learn, listen, and ask. Yeah, and I think that is that I think that closes us for today. Brenda, do you want to bring us into this isn't a bow. This is we opened the floodgates, and
Yeah,
we're showing it to y'all, and I hope y'all take this as an opportunity to explore.
thank you. Yeah, thank you, Linet. I want to also share a huge appreciation for our forming relationship, for our conversations. And so that's on a personal level. I think as folks in the anti-oppression DEI space, this is collaboration, this is partnership. And it's a way that I've really appreciated to disrupt how business usually operates, which is in silos. So this is a huge value to the work that we're in, and I really appreciate it.
I'm the same. The same.
To close, I'm feeling like really energized. So I don't know if I can bring us down to a Zen-centered place. What I will do is maybe just let the energy be shook off. Take a deep breath in and exhale. And we're going to take a deep breath in, moving our arms way up, really stretching it. When we're up here, exhale, leap them up. You're going to take an inhale and make fists. And then let me exhale. Next round, you're just going to bring them down.
Whoa.
As a way to shake that off. Yeah, my window of tolerance, I'm like, all right. Thank you all so much for joining us today. Check out at UBP. Sorry, I was like UBM. No. Check out UBP_STEM. That is the Unconscious Bias Project. We have Linet here from Unconscious Bias Project, and check them out. They're doing a great series called Breaking Bread. Information will be in the captions, and I hope you all have a good day. I'll stay connected, comunidad. Bye.
Bye. Gracias, Brenda.
Gracias.